Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of my debut YouTube series, Pricks of the Year 2025, a series showcasing the wrinkliest, cheesiest, most crab-infested ball bags barnacling at the bottom of the barrel of humanity in this, the year of our Lord 2025 AD.
Now, to bring you up to speed on the series, episode 2 was a bit of a strange one. It began in concept as following the same formula as the first episode I did a couple of weeks ago. However, last week, there was an incredibly large and, one would imagine, incredibly constipated orange elephant in the room, who ended up hogging almost the entire video all to himself. In case you missed it, are new to the series, and/or are as horrified by that shit-skinned, shit-brained lunatic's return to the White House as I am, do go and check out that episode after you've watched this one. And hell, while you're at it, you might as well watch episode 1 too. Seeing as you're already here, let's not pretend you have anything better to do with your morning/afternoon/evening.
However, in this episode, we're going back to the status quo. You'll be pleased to know that I've returned with more pricks than you can prick a prickly stick at, and more tits and arseholes than in Boris Johnson's wettest dream. So, without further ado, let's get to them.
Number 1. Joseph Farage. The series may only be 3 episodes in, but we have already hit our first historic milestone. The first time 2 members of the same family have earned inclusions all to themselves. Joseph Farage, who looks like if the sentence
"Oh, my father will hear about this!"
were a person, last week pleaded guilty at Croydon Magistrates Court to the offence of upskirting a woman by placing a mobile phone beneath her clothing with the intention of sharing the photos with a third party in order to humiliate and distress the woman in question. The feeling of having a Farage invading their personal space without their consent is one that the few sane and decent people who still use Twitter know only too well.
And I know describing anyone still using Elon Musk's Twitter in 2025 as sane is something of a contradiction in terms, but just go with me, yeah?
And if there's one thing we know the Farage family to be an absolute authority on, it's humiliation. In total, Joseph Farage was ordered to pay £1,091 in costs, but despite the nature of the offence, he avoided a custodial sentence, and won't even be placed on the sex offenders register. For all of Reform and their supporters' unhinged ranting about two-tier policing, it seems they might have actually been onto something, just not in the way they'd anticipated or intended. At 31 years of age, Joseph Farage is still young enough to learn from his mistakes, mend his ways, and turn his life around. And on a personal level, may I suggest that the next time he wants to see a pure twat that doesn't want to be exposed or scrutinised, he can just go and visit his uncle instead. Number 2. Neil Gaiman. Speaking of grotesque sexual deviance, a number of disturbing and graphic allegations against the Good Omens co-creator came to light a few weeks ago. Now, I obviously can't go into too much detail here because, YouTube. However, I can hypothesise that the revelations must have been music to the ears of 50 Shades of Grey writer E.L. James, as her name will no longer be the first to automatically pop into people's heads when they're asked to think of Britain's worst author. On a personal level, the allegations against Gaiman have hit my wife pretty hard, as she's a big fan of his work, has several of his books adorning her bookshelf, and was actually the one who got me into the TV adaptation of Good Omens last year. She was also previously a huge fan of Marilyn Manson, so it's safe to say she sure knows how to pick her heroes. Indeed, with her recently discovered love of snooker, I now can't help but find myself looking at Steve Davis with what I sincerely hope is unwarranted suspicion. Arguably the most sickening accusations came from Scarlett Pavlovich, 22 years old and babysitting for Gaiman's son at the time of the alleged
Stop!
She states that on one occasion, the author coerced her into a before demanding she clean him up afterwards, thus forcing her to lick her own shit. The sensation of such a foul taste on the end of a gristly Ed Guinness is sadly one I'm all too familiar with, having once tried Richmond sausages. Pavlovich also claims that Gaiman would insist on her calling him master. Ironic really, considering that's the last thing people are going to be calling him from now on. Instead, it's far more likely that if the allegations are true, he'll find himself being called the most vile and depraved individual in the field of creative writing for quite some time to come. Or at least until J.K. Rowling next logs into her Twitter account. Number 3. King Charles III. In light of the Channel 4 Dispatch's investigation into the royal finances that aired towards the end of last year, you'd think that Charles, who let's not forget had one of the best educations that money or stolen jewels can buy, would have the presence of mind to tone down the ostentatious pomp and ceremony bollocks for the foreseeable future. However, perhaps taking PR advice from Gerald Ratner, this is how the reigning monarch chose to leave the area after visiting a food bank in Clackmannanshire last week. Now, unless he was there to donate his fingers so that a hard-up family in the local area could have sausages for tea that night, I've absolutely no idea what useful purpose this visit was meant to serve. Unless he was there to personally collect the rent money from the food bank for continued permission to operate on his land. It's been nearly 3 years since Charles ascended the throne following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, a death that led to heavily enforced mourning across the UK. One notable phenomenon in the immediate aftermath of Liz's passing was the queue for the Queen, in which people of all ages, all genders, and from all walks of life were queuing for up to 24 hours to see the late Queen lying in state. The last time before then that so many young girls felt obliged to queue up to see something cold and stiff was outside Prince Andrew's bedroom at Jeffrey Epstein's house. It'll likely shock you to the core at this point when I tell you that I'm not a huge fan of the royal family. One of the biggest bugbears of mine in telling people this is when they respond with something along the lines of, "Yeah, right, but think of all the money they bring in from tourism." To those people, I'd like to take this opportunity to put the following counter-arguments to you. A. Do they? Really? How much of that do you ever see in your bank account? And B. Do you imagine that prior to the French Revolution, the following conversation ever took place anywhere in France? Jean-Pierre, this is très malheureusement. The king and his madame, they rule so cruelly and callously, and they live in such luxury, while we starve and struggle. We must storm the Bastille, overthrow them, and remove their heads. Vive la France! No, Emmanuel. If we do this, then think of the incredibly adverse effects on the tourism industry. Without King Louis XVI and his madame, Marie Antoinette, how will we sell crappy tea towels and commemorative coffee cups to American visitors? Number 4. James Watt. No, not the 18th century inventor and engineer. Although if that James Watt, who died in 1819, has managed to do anything to warrant being included in a series called Pricks of the Year 2025, do let me know in the comments below. While you're at it, do also let me know who you think is worthy of inclusion in a future episode. Now where was I? Oh yeah, no, this James Watt. The founder and CEO of Brewdog, who has made millions from a combination of underpaying his staff and selling overpriced beer to gullible hipsters. Watt, who is to ethical business practices what Marvin Gaye Sr. was to supportive parenting, and can only be described as what Humpty Dumpty would have become if all the king's horses and all the king's men had succeeded in putting him back together again, but been unable to repair the damage to his ventromedial prefrontal cortex, recently stated in an interview that employees do not need a work-life balance.
I guess you could say, what a bell end.
In fairness to him, I think he's right. Nobody needs a work-life balance. So with this in mind, we should all spend a lot more time working and a lot less time drinking his beer and visiting his pubs. Indeed, I say we should all avoid both entirely, and I'm sure Mr. Watt himself would fully approve of this action. And finally, number 5, Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate, pictured here looking like a Sun reader who's just walked past two foreign tourists speaking to each other in their mother tongue, wants to run for Prime Minister of the UK. No, that's not a headline from a spoof news article in a Viz comic. This is straight from the horse's mouth, or in this case, the meathead's Twitter account. If nothing else, it's an extremely bold and ambitious plan, and besides his fundamental lack of understanding as to how the UK political system works, the fact that it might be several years before he's even allowed to leave Romania, and his inability to spell Britain, a plan I can't see any glaring flaws or drawbacks with. Although, given the similar ignorance as to the workings of the UK political system displayed by an actual former Prime Minister, literally as I was writing the script for this video, perhaps the idea isn't as ridiculous as we might have hoped. Andrew Tate, alongside his brother Tristan, is currently on remand in Romania, facing charges of, among other things, money laundering and human trafficking. In the dystopian fantasy world in which he became UK Prime Minister, Tate would no doubt be popular with the alt-right section of the electorate, and he would certainly fulfil his pre-election campaign promise of sending all the European immigrants home. Although, exactly whose home they'd end up being sent to would depend on whoever was the highest bidder.
So, that's it. I'll be back with new content as and when I have it, but in the meantime, feel free to peruse what I've already got on the channel. And don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share, ring the bell, tell all your mates, etc. I may be a relative novice to this YouTube stuff, but I'm already painfully aware that trying to get a channel off the ground is an absolute bastard. So any help you lot can give me would be much appreciated.
You may be interested to know that I'm also on Instagram, and despite Elon Musk's best efforts, I'm still knocking around on the 4chan-esque hellscape formerly known as Twitter, and I shall put the links in the description.
So, I shall sod off for now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you all again very soon.